can see the chat, and as my PowerPoint loads, I'll just let you know that I can monitor both. I can look at your faces, I can look at my slides, and I can look at the chat. So let's make this interactive as if it were face-to-face, and just jump in if you have anything to say, anything to ask. Let's make sure that you feel free to interrupt me, and then at the end I'll leave enough time for us to have a conversation. So the talk is really about my my career, but also a little bit about some values and habits and things that I do that I think I'd like to share with others so that they can do it, because I think that they are important, not only to make a difference in the world, but also I think they can help people advance their career to the extent that they've helped me as well. You know, I've been doing a lot of presentations lately, but I've also been watching others do presentations. My department is hiring faculty, and it feels like almost every week we have a new candidate joining us and giving a talk. And I've been watching their talks over the last few months and reflecting on this this phenomenon of the PowerPoint slide that begins with, you know, about me, right? Sometimes that's even the title of the slide. It's about me. And usually it'll go for like 1 or 2 slides. In some cases, it'll go for several slides. And it becomes kind of this like ritual of this is the first thing that we tell people. Now, a few years ago, I remember somebody actually commented to me and said, this is something that white males tend to do more than anybody else. It's like the white male introduction, you know, handshake to an academic audience. And I thought that's actually really interesting. And that might be, you know, why you see some do it and some don't. But I sometimes will do it and sometimes not. But I've never been asked to give a whole seminar on just that one slide, or to expand it into multiple. The reason I talk about the about me slide specifically is that I recently watched a couple of really amazing people give a talk that it was about their science and about their research, but it began with a little bit about themselves and their family. So we had one visitor who talked about how a long history of her family's community engagement in Alabama led her to do community-based research on health in the state of Alabama. And she showed pictures of her generations of families, you know, pictures of herself with her parents, pictures of her parents with their parents, pictures of family members at the March on Selma, pictures of family members receiving major awards from the state and city. And I thought it was a brilliant way to kind of frame the story of how she came to be a community-based researcher. And then there was another presenter in December who came to visit our department, and she talked about how her early experiences as a nurse, as actually unlicensed nursing aide, was very formative in how it affected her, the work she does now as a professor of nursing, as a researcher in caregiving, and how impactful it was to actually be on the front lines and to see the stories, but also, you know, see sometimes the gaps, the deficiencies that could be fixed in the system. So anyway, that was a reflection more than anything about how I want to tell you some more about myself as a person before I tell you more about my research or my trajectory through research. And it is personal. So I'll begin by telling you that I wasn't born in the US. And I was actually born in Ukraine. I lived in Ukraine for the first 7 years of my life. And telling you that now is probably laden with all sorts of other thoughts and reflections that you might be having, and that I'm certainly having, given what's going on today, yesterday, and just in general in that country. My parents were also born and grew up and lived for a long time in Ukraine. And at the time, it was part of the Soviet Union, and they saw the writing on the wall. They saw, um, the discrimination that they were facing as Eastern European Jews in the Soviet Union, and they wanted to avoid that for their family, for their children, and for themselves to some extent. So they moved, they left. We immigrated and left under a refugee status. But at the time, and this was 1988, we ended up in Italy, and we ended up stuck in Italy. And I don't want to take you through the politics at the time that left us there, but it had to do with George H.W. Bush and kind of a blockade of immigration into the U.S. For a short period of time, about a year, but left us stranded in the country of Italy, in a place called Santa Marinella near Rome, and without jobs, without support, without anything. And my parents went to work. So my dad, who was trained as an engineer, he has a master's degree in electrical engineering and a master's in mechanical engineering. Went to work in the fields, picking grapes on plantations. So his job in Italy was, so he could be paid in cash, was picking grapes. My mom, who has a master's degree in mechanical engineering and worked as an engineer in Ukraine, went to work as a maid in people's houses. So she cleaned houses and served as a maid. And I felt compelled to go get a job as well. So why do I tell you this? Because the sacrifice that my parents made to leave their very good lifestyle and to seek something better for their children resulted in them having to do something that wasn't in their discipline, wasn't in their profession, and one would say was below their capabilities and below their education. And yet they did it, and it was my first experience of really learning work ethic and what is the value of just putting your head down and getting things done, getting to work. And I wanted to replicate that, and I was a child at the time, but I really wanted to be like them. So I said, what can I do? Where can I get a job? I had two jobs, really. One of them, we brought a suitcase of stuff, mementos, like, wooden little figurines and tchotchkes, and I would sell them at the market. And I actually became a really good negotiator. Like I would like, oh, you don't want it? Okay, that's fine. And then, oh, what if I give you this, right? So I became really good at haggling and bargaining. And if you ever take me back to a place where you can haggle for the price of an object, whether it's the Italian marketplace or whether it's buying a car, I'm really, really good at it. So that was my real first job. And then the one that I picked up in Italy was washing car windows outside of a gas station. And I don't know if I was sanctioned to do that by anybody. I think the owner took pity on me and let me do it. I don't know if I was good at it, and I have this debate with my wife where I'm like, I was really, really good at it. I could wash a window like crazy. Like I had the squeegee. I had my own. I bought my own squeegee kind of thing, and I had towels so I could dry, and I would wash people's car windows as they went into the little store. And then when they came out, they would give me some money, and I earned a crazy $37 US in that period of 10 months that we were in Italy doing my first job. So that's a little bit of fun, that I found something to do. But again, the reason I did it is because of the work ethic that I saw in my parents. And then the next little bit of a story that formed my early values has to do with things that I saw as we were leaving Italy, or that's where it began. So as we were about to get on the plane to come to the U.S., my grandmother, who was traveling with us and lived with us prior to us moving, and then after us moving to the U.S. and throughout the remainder of her life, had a health event. And I actually don't know specifically what the health event was. It was cardiac. It had to do with elevated blood pressure, but I don't actually know what happened. All I remember is that all of a sudden something had gone wrong with her health, and I was acutely aware that health varies, that bad things can happen, and changes can occur. Life-altering and life-threatening events take place, but all of a sudden I saw that she was being taken care of by a health system, and that's kind of where I began to think about health systems, health care. Until when as I was growing up and in my teenage years, my grandmother started experiencing complications of healthcare delivery. So she received the wrong medication several times. This led to insulin-induced diabetes. This led to all sorts of other problems. She lost an eye because of misdiagnosis. So at the time, I had no idea that you could even have bad doctors or bad systems. I just knew intuitively that the system could be better, could be improved. I wasn't blaming any doctor, and never have since. But I could see that there were improvements that could be made in managing the health of my family and others around me. And so this is my last bullet is about is the last thing I'll say about being a child in the 80s and 90s. But when we moved to the U.S., the other thing that happened is that I had to fit in, and I speak without an accent now, right? But when I first came to the U.S., I had an accent. I didn't speak any English. In fact, I spoke fluent Italian, but that didn't get me very far. And I spoke Russian and Ukrainian, and that also didn't get me very far. But I was put in. At the time, it was called ESL, English as a Second Language. Now we call it English language learning. But I was taken out of class and put into a different place and kind of separated from the rest of the people. And I remember one time I ended up being in that class and I missed out on this really fun activity where you got to earn fake money so that you could go buy things. And I was like, oh, I missed out. And so I was conspicuously different for a while. Also, my name was weird, right? So Rich Holden is my legal name, but it's been changed from my given name. And I dressed weird, like we didn't have the money to buy the cool stuff. I remember wearing Akeem Olajuwons. They're like these shoes that you could get at Kmart that were like a knockoff of Air Jordans. So, Air Jordans were very popular. These were the Air Olajuwons. So even the clothing was different from what other people were wearing, and so I was conspicuously different. And for me, early on, after coming to the U.S., the main thing that I wanted to do was fit in, to just be like everybody else. And so I looked for ways to kind of adopt the mannerisms of other people, to find, sometimes unsuccessfully, the right way to dress. So I knew that shoes with some kind of basketball star were important. Didn't quite know which ones were the good basketball stars, but I tried hard to fit in. So let's talk about my profession. If you fast forward several years, you find out that I actually got into industrial engineering. And again, there is a little bit of transition from family influence. I already told you that my family were both my father and mother trained in engineering, and they said, you have to be an engineer. You have to be an, I don't know why they said I have to be one, but they said so. And so I rebelled and I decided I would become an industrial engineer, which is, those of you who are industrial engineers or connected to industrial engineering, which is all of you know, is biomechanical engineer is not considered engineering. So so it's a little bit of an act of rebellion. And so my parents are like, what are you doing? But I actually knew a little bit more about industrial engineering than just that it had the word engineering in it. I had a chance to, through another family connection, work at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the Department of Industrial Engineering, and work for an ergonomics professor, just doing like website stuff just over a couple summers. And I became interested in what he was doing because he wasn't doing a lot of physics and chemistry and, you know, electricity. He was doing things around lifting equations, and how do we improve people's musculoskeletal health, and you know, how do we improve biomechanics? But that's really interesting. How's that engineering? And so that was my first introduction to ergonomics, my first introduction to industrial engineering, but it was just a job, and so I had it on my mind. Then I became interested in psychology. Now this is kind of in high school, and we'll transition a little bit to college, but in high school I became interested in psychology for two reasons. One, I took a test, one of those vocational tests, and it said you might be a psychologist in the future. So something I said on the test made people think that that could happen. And then two, there was a cute girl in class who also took the test, and the test told her that she could be a good psychologist. And so I found out that if I talked to her about psychology and the interpretation of dreams, that I could spend more time with her. So I became interested in psychology as a concept, and then later on, I came back to it. So then there are two events in college that were really monumental. And the first was what I call the lecture. As a freshman, undergraduate, pre-engineering major, or whatever I was, pre-engineering student, I attended a survey of industrial engineering course. So I took a survey of engineering, and then I took a survey of industrial engineering. I was starting to narrow down a little bit. And this was my first semester. And all of a sudden, in comes this gray-haired professor named Mike Smith, and he draws on the board, on the chalkboard, this model called the balance model. A balance model, you can't really see it in the picture here, but what you can see in the picture is a history of what was originally the balance model and has since become the SEIPS model, Systems Engineering Initiative and Patient Safety Model, and subsequently has become SEIPS 2.0, SEIPS 3.0, and most recently SEIPS 101. For those of you who've looked up some stuff about me or know me, you'll know that one of the things that I'm quote unquote famous for is originating with my colleagues the SEIPS 2.0 framework, and then most recently expanding some of the work on SEIPS to make it more practitioner oriented, and that's what SEIPS 101 is. And so I actually, thanks to that one lecture, have had a career of scientific development that is directly connected to that balance model. But the balance model was really interesting. It was basically this picture that said the person is in the middle. There's all this other stuff around, the tools, the tasks, the organizational environment, and the physical environment. And these things around that person are why the person behaves and performs the way they do. So let's improve the tools so that that person can get better outcomes. Let's not blame the person for a bad system performance. Let's think about ways to improve the organization. Let's think of ways to improve the environment, the tasks, and fit them around that person. So this concept of fit was essential, and I was like, that's very, very intriguing. But I remember raising my hand and saying, so you just told me that the system is all these things with a person in the middle, and we need to design to support the person in the middle. How is it that that's not how we act normally? Like, how is that not like on everybody's mind? Why is not everybody thinking that this is how systems work, that we need to support people in the middle? And Mike Smith said, well, to find out the answer to that question, you might need to become an industrial engineer and learn human factors and ergonomics. I thought, okay, challenge accepted. So I said, I'm gonna become an industrial engineer. I'm going to take classes in this thing called human factors, and I'm going to figure out why we don't design systems around people. Why do we try to force people to contort to systems? So I'll get to that in a moment. But then there's another thing that happened the same semester, same year, and that was the dare. And I dared myself. So nobody had to dare me to do what I thought at the time was the impossible, and that is to attend and stay awake in an 8 a.m. class 3 days out of the week. So there's a psychology class, and it was being offered at 8 a.m. 3 times a week. And I said, Rich, if you go to that class and you don't fall asleep in anything less than half the class, the half the classes that you go to, you don't fall asleep, consider psychology. That might be another major for you. Well, I stayed awake in all those classes. And at the time, waking up at 8 a.m., although now I wake up at 6, at the time it would have been impossible, I thought, unless something really caught my attention. And psychology caught my attention, and this time there were no cute girls to distract me, and I knew that I was doing it for the right reasons. And so I said, I really want to do the psychology thing, and I want to do this industrial engineering thing. And so that's when I met with my pre-engineering advisor, and I sat down with her and I said, all right, how do I get all this, my goals accomplished? I said, first, I need to do a double major. I need to be a psychologist and an industrial engineer. She said, you're kidding, right? You can't do that. You cannot be an engineer and something else. You have to be an engineer. There's just not enough. You won't be able to graduate. There's too many classes to take. I said, okay, all right. Let's just talk about engineering. We'll talk about psychology later, because she was after all, the pre-engineering advisor. I said, okay, so I've got all these credits that I've gotten from high school. Let's talk about that. She said, what about them? I said, well, are they going to count? She said, no, not really. I said, let's break this down. She said, do you like calculus? I said, no, I hate calculus. I'm done with calculus. She said, okay, you're going to have to take 3 more semesters of calculus. I said, okay. She said, physics, what kind of physics do you have? I said, I've got physics credits from college, from high school rather, and I did well. What do you think of that? She said, well, was it calculus-based physics? I was like, no. She said, okay, well, forget about those. You're going to have to take more physics, 3 more classes in physics and chemistry. And I started tuning things out. I said, that's fine. I'll get through all of those. That's fine. I'm hardworking. I used to wash windows in Italy. I can do this too. But what about what else? What else do I have to take? She said, I will be glad to sit down with you and show you the courses you will take, but it doesn't sound like you're interested in taking them. I said, no, I can take them, but I also want to be able to take music appreciation, and I want to take sociology, and I want to take Scandinavian studies, literature classes. So I'll balance my life, and I'll get through the physics and calculus. She said, you can't take those classes. What do you mean? She said, you can't take music. You can't take literature. What are you, crazy? I said, can I at least take Spanish? I love Spanish. I want to keep learning Spanish. She said, you can't. She said, have you finished at least one class of Spanish? I said, yes. She said, you're done. You're done with Spanish. So anyway, so I said, okay, this is really getting to be pretty disappointing. And she said, Rich, I know exactly what you need to do. You need to leave engineering and come back later. So that's actually what I did. So I went and I got my undergraduate in psychology. I left engineering. I came back later, ended up with my MS in industrial engineering and a PhD in industrial engineering. So let me tell you a little bit of information about me, though. So I like buffets, right? And I don't know how many of you like buffets. Like, I don't know how many of you like buffets so much that you prefer them to ordering off of a menu. But I'm one of those people. And it's because I go to the buffet and I get to try a bunch of things. I get to even combine things, you know, this sauce with that sauce a little bit. And I don't have to choose. And that's the most important thing. I had a friend in grad school who became a vegetarian just so she wouldn't have to pick between half of the menu and the other half of the menu. Like she cut out half of the options by becoming vegetarian. I'm not like that. I'm not going to like reduce the number of choices. I want all the choices. I just don't want to be stuck with one. And so why do I say that? Because what happened to me when I ended up in grad school is that I couldn't let go of psychology. And you heard in the introduction that Dr. Chen gave that I trained psychology and engineering. I actually kept doing that throughout grad school, and ended up with masters in both and a joint PhD in both. And part of it was that I saw the connections, right? I liked the idea of psychology and engineering being two sides of the same coin, or I saw value of adding psychology to engineering, adding engineering to psychology. And that mentality is sometimes called lumping, right? Lumping is a term, or being a lumper, that some will attribute to Charles Darwin. I like Charles Darwin, so I'm going to just do the same. So he talked about the difference between lumpers and splitters. The lumpers are the ones who like the word and better than the word or. The splitters are the other way around. They prefer to categorize things and say, this is different from that. This fox is different from that fox, right? Whereas the lumpers are like foxes, wolves, dogs, elephant, they're all kind of the same, right? Let's think about the commonalities more than about the differences. So I happen to be one of the people who lumped, and I happen to be good at it. I found connections between things, and I enjoyed finding connections between things, whether it's between historical events and modern day activities, whether it's between two theories, or whether it's between aviation and healthcare. I love the idea of looking for connections and lumping them together and saying there are no differences. You know, people say you're in the school of public health. That's where I am right now. That's so different from medicine, so different from nursing, pharmacy, and engineering, psychology. I say, no, it's not. It's about the same, right? There are so many more commonalities than there are differences. And so lumping became the first habit that I really started to practice, that led me to pursue a career that was right? There was industrial engineering and psychology. There was patients and healthcare professionals. That was technology and people, right? Not technology or people. Now, I did develop a passion for healthcare along the way, and again, that was prefaced in some ways by an interest in just personal things that were happening in my family and around me. But also, it just became a passion of mine because I had an advisor, a mentor who became interested in healthcare himself. And he used to tell this story. He started off doing work in manufacturing. He then went and did a postdoc in agriculture. He studied people who lie down on these machines to harvest crops and, to kind of improve their biomechanics and to reduce work-related musculoskeletal disorders. And so he had studies upon studies of agricultural machinery. and so he did that for a postdoc, and then he switched over and he became a faculty member, and he started doing work in the world of healthcare. And I just remember how relieved he was that he wasn't working on agriculture, and how excited he was that he was working on healthcare. And I remember sitting down with him, and I asked, you know, why? What's the deal? He said, Rich, how many farmers are there in America? I don't know. How many people benefit from farming? I don't know. But I can tell you for sure that everybody here benefits from healthcare delivery. Everybody here has health to manage. This is an issue of over 300 million in the US and many, many more. So healthcare is universal. It affects us all. It's very important. And best of all, at the time that I was getting my degree, a big report came out around 99, 2000 saying, and healthcare is broken, and we need human factors people to come fix it. So not only was healthcare a great opportunity to make a difference in the world, but also it was a place where we were being called for. So that's kind of what led me to do research in healthcare, and then, you know, the why choose one, and the picture of, you know, the not being able to pick a single crayon is kind of about why I chose to then do both industrial engineering and psychology at the same time. I had a conversation last Friday with a doctoral student whom I mentor, and I asked her how many. Oh, okay. I need to press a button, but I don't know how to do that.
Excuse me, what's wrong with that?
Oh, you guys can move your own slides too.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know how to use Teams.
No, it's kind of sharing the entire slides with us, so everyone can play with it.
Oh, good. Oh, thank you. Well, that's a cool. I like that design, because a lot of times I want to go back and see something or skip ahead. All right. Well, I'm on slide number 4, and so I'm at the end of slide number 4, talking about having to pick, having to choose. I think this is something I want to share with doctoral students, especially, right? And that is this conversation that I was having with a student last week, where I asked her, "Why do you want to do so many things for your dissertation?" Because she had a list of, like, I don't know, like 6 things. She said, "I want to do them all." I said, "Okay, let me ask you. Imagine that." You can create a work of art. Imagine you're a painter, and imagine that one unit is like a painting on a canvas. Above that are multiple paintings that maybe are in a gallery during an exhibit, and then imagine that below that level of analysis are you know, figures on the canvas, or parts of the canvas, the upper left, bottom right. I said, "What do you think your dissertation is in that analogy?" She said, she thought about it. Then she said, "I don't know much about painting." I said, "That's okay, you don't have to. So, but tell me what is the match?" And she said, "I think that my dissertation will be a gallery exhibit." And I said, "Uh-oh," right? Uh-oh. And I told her what my advisor told me. He said, "Your dissertation is the first brush stroke of paint on the canvas. And everything you do subsequent to that is going to add to that painting, and eventually you'll have the painting. And sometimes you'll have a painting, and then you'll do another painting, and then you'll do another painting, and then you'll have an exhibit, and maybe then you get the Nobel Prize or something." But he really helped me right size this idea. For somebody who, like me, and some of you are like me, who likes buffets, who likes a little bit of everything, who likes, you know, does not like to choose, likes to lump. Being able to say, I will do one small thing, can be very challenging. And so my dissertation is where it came to a head, and that's why I wanted to share that with you know, with current doctoral students, is that sometimes you have to choose, and sometimes you end up adding to that painting later, but you do it later. You don't do it right away. Okay. So now I'm on faculty, right? And this is after I've done the dissertation. Let me get to the right page. Okay, well, I'm on slide 5. Anyway, and in my faculty career, I've done several things that are interesting. But a colleague of mine made an observation a couple of weeks ago. They were presenting me at a patient safety symposium, and they said, you know, I just read your biography out, and I just realized that you trained in engineering and psychology, but you subsequently never worked in a department of engineering or a department of psychology. So I've been in a school of medicine twice, 2 schools of medicine. I've been faculty in the School of Nursing. I've been faculty in the School of Informatics. I've been faculty now in the School of Public Health, but I've never been in engineering or psychology. And that's a really interesting observation. So we'll get to that in a second. And the other thing that was observed to me is that every 3 to 4 years, I move on to something else. And unfortunately, this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube, and then, you know, my boss will find out. But he could have done the math himself that, you know, in 2011 to 2014, I shifted gears. I went to another university. 2014 to 2018, I moved out of the School of Informatics into a School of Medicine. And in 2018, I was there for 3 years until I moved to a School of Public Health to take on a leadership position as a department chair. But the reason I talk about those changes is because I think that's an essential component of success, is to look for, you know, be on the lookout for opportunities, and then do what we call harvesting luck. So a lot of success, a lot of the world is about chance and luck and good fortune. And your job is to harvest it. So if you see an opportunity, take it, right? So one of the reasons I've moved around is because I've been harvesting luck. But one of the consequences of moving around is that I've gotten to learn a little bit of everything from across different places. So I've had a chance to learn about medicine from doctors. I've had a chance to learn about nursing from nursing faculty. I've had a chance to learn social science. I've had a chance to talk to practitioners, people who run hospitals, who run patient safety departments. I've had a chance to learn informatics and that particular discipline. So when you're somebody who's gone and learned a lot of little instruments, but you're not yourself a virtuoso, if you're not able to like be the number one at any one instrument, sometimes you start asking yourself, maybe I can be a conductor. And this is a concept that we've come up with and written about and talked about and try to teach in some of our graduate certificates for professionals, is the art of being a multilinguistic symphonic conductor. So a multilinguistic conductor is not a choo-choo kind of conductor. It's the person who stands up front and directs the orchestra or the band. And I put a picture of Teddy Abrams, who's a famous conductor. I don't know if you guys know him. He is in charge of the Louisville Symphony and a couple of other things in town. But what he's known for is being an eclectic musician. He's a great music director. He's a great conductor. But what he's known for is that he's a clarinetist, a pianist, percussionist. I think he does all these, he plays all these instruments kind of well. I'm not sure he's great at it. And that's kind of how I would describe myself. Somebody who can play the instruments well enough that they can coordinate the whole to play in harmony. It's an undervalued skill. It's something that I think engineers are especially good at doing, being leaders of teams that are multidisciplinary, multi-professional, and being the one that, by virtue of having some knowledge of each part, is able to conduct the whole. I will make a callback to that concept, though, of trying to fit in and dress right and adopt an American accent, that when you are somebody who ends up dabbling and trying out different things and moving from place to place, you end up being not only the person who can fit in everywhere or tries to fit in, but also a person who fits in nowhere. So one of the observations I make about my own career is that I have always been a misfit, a weirdo. Like, who's that guy? What's he doing here? And I still am. And so this is something we can talk about together too. All right, I'll speed up a little bit with the storytelling by kind of getting to the final component of what I think are the habits to success. And this is having an agile mindset. So the phone call and the meeting were two other events that occurred. Now, this time I was on faculty at Indiana University, and I was just arriving at Indiana University after having spent some time at Vanderbilt. And so I didn't know too many people. And so I started observing, who do I respect? And I sent an email to this gentleman named Malaz Bustani, who's a mentor of mine to the day. And I sent him my CV and I said, I need somebody to connect to, and I need somebody to talk to, and I need some help. And like later that day, 3 hours later, I'm driving the car, about to pick up my son from kindergarten, and I get a phone call from somebody. I don't know who they are. I happen to pick up the phone on my car, so I was safe. And the person says, "This is Malaz Bustani." I said, "Okay." And the guy's calling me. I just sent him an email with my CV. I said, "Let's find time to talk later." He said, "What are you doing?" And I say, I'm driving." He's like, "Pull over." So I pull over in the parking lot of a coffee shop, and we start talking. He says, "What do you want? What do you need? What do you?" And I tell him all these things, and he says, we're gonna do this together. And I said, "What are we gonna do together?" We're gonna change the world together. You and I, we're gonna change the world. That's great. I don't know who you are, but I can't wait to meet you. And so then when I met him, in the executive suite of the IU health system, our large academic health system, and I sat down with him, and he brought in all these other people. He brought in these people that were around him. I'm like, I thought it was the meeting between you and I, but apparently it's not. And I remember these were really unusual people. They were like reading these unusual books. They had books under their arms with on topics that were very unusual, and they talked very unusually. And they started grilling me. They started asking, so they said, what do you do and how do you do it? And I started telling them, and they said, "You're too slow. You're too slow. You take too long to get things done. You don't make any differences. You don't make change. You're not transforming the world." And I was like, "Okay, you're right. Okay." And it was a really formative experience because I thought I was doing great. And for the first time, I was starting to get really productive negative feedback. They were telling me, "You're too slow. You wait too long to make change. You're not proactive enough." And I started working with those people. Those are my favorite people to work with now. We work together. We've written books together, and we've written books about agility, to the point of being too slow. Agility is about trying things out when they're good enough. Those of you who know about Agile software development, you probably have some appreciation. Those of you who know about Agile project management have a better appreciation. But agility is a set of processes. We have a set of processes called Agile implementation, Agile innovation, but it's also a mindset. So mindset of agility, I'll give you the really brief version, and that's it. Sprints, there's 4 S's. So if you know lean, there's 5 S's. So this is even less, which is better. It's more lean than lean. So S, sprints, you come up with an MVP, a product, a prototype that you can test out, and you run your sprints on it as soon as possible. You don't wait until you have a perfect final version. You run sprints on prototypes. Sensors, you put sensors out in the environment. So gossip, data, whatever you can get, you put sensors out in the environment so you can collect feedback and data to know how to behave and how your sprints went. Safety of the psychological variety. So in order to come up with bad solutions that you will improve on and see how they actually work, you need psychological safety. Otherwise, you won't even try. You won't even trust the feedback you get. You'll be afraid. And then the scientific method, which is an umbrella. So this is basically taking the scientific method and putting it into practical operations. So that's agility. We've written about it. I find that having become agile myself, this concept of taking your work home. So I take agility and I try to be agile in losing weight. I try to be agile in learning new languages. I try to be agile in everything I do. And so agility is a mindset that can permeate not only work, but also life. I won't say too much more about that, but I will move on to this maybe second to last quick slide. When I told a couple of my colleagues that I was going to take on the position of department chair, one of them wrote to me and said, "Are you insane?" So that's a question I ask myself, am I insane? And then I asked a former chancellor friend of mine what he thought of me becoming a department chair. And he said, I've been a chancellor, I've been everything below a chancellor, and the hardest job is department chair. So I thought, okay, I wish you told me before I took the job. But so my current job, for those of you who are interested in thinking about the trajectory of faculty and academic life, is as a department chair. I am the optimizer of the system, which includes the levels above me and the levels below me. And who better to be a department chair than an industrial engineer, right? Optimizing the system. But I took on the position just this past July, and I've been in it for 7 months and 25 days. And I'm not keeping count, but I know that's how many days it's been. And I'm loving it. But that is not what every faculty member ends up doing. At the same time, that is what I ended up doing. I ended up doing it because they needed me. They had a job posting. They said, we need a chair. And I said, okay, I can do that. I did it because of purpose, because I certainly realized that I have a big goal to, produce better health by design, change healthcare systems. And I knew I couldn't do it alone. So being a chair means you automatically have like 15 people working with you. I wanted the new challenge, and so I have a strong mastery orientation where I want to be able to take on new difficult challenges. And I wanted autonomy, and autonomy is like I want to drive. I don't like to watch other people drive. I'd prefer to do it myself. And so how better to have a department where you enjoy doing what you're doing as a faculty member than one where you are the chair and you get to run how things go. But as a chair, I've realized that I have a lot to learn, and so I've had to go back to school, and I've done probably more reading over the last 7 months and learning about leadership than I have in the preceding 40 years. I'm going to stop here, except I'm going to put up this slide 8, just to tell you that whether it's currently as chair, whether it's as a faculty member, or just as a person, there's a number of things I've experienced that I'm happy to talk about. I've experienced a lot of failure, and I think that we don't talk a lot about failure. We talk a lot about success, and I'm happy to talk about failure. Somebody I talked to the other day said we should show students the anti-CV. Have you heard of this anti-CV? It's a CV that lists all your failures, as opposed to the CV normally that lists all your accomplishments, and it's much, much longer. I can talk about being in a 2 academic household, a professional household with, my wife is also a professor. Could talk about how to get papers published. I'm the outgoing journal editor of the Journal of Ergonomics, and I'm just finishing up my role there. Being a grant reviewer and somebody who's received grants from NIH, NSF, and other foundations and funding sources and federal funding sources. Could talk about that. I could talk about my experience serving on hiring committees, negotiating offers, reviewing applications. I'm doing a lot of hiring these days, so if anybody's interested in knowing what that looks like and how to be successful, I'm happy to talk. And then entrepreneurship, serving on boards of directors, boards of advisors. I've dabbled here and there, been part of companies, and then any advice on networking and interviewing from especially the introverts out there like myself, because I know it can be tougher. I'll stop there. I'll give you, if you guys want to look at slide number 9, that's how you get a hold of me. You can either Google me or send me an email.
Well, thank you, Dr. Holden, for sharing all of this. It's a amazing life you have been. So I'm pretty sure we have audience and who are really interested in your experience and want to learn from you. Let's see if there's any questions from the audience. Please feel free to open your mic and directly ask Dr. Holden if you have any questions in mind. And we do have a question in the chat. I will read it out for everyone. So I've heard that it's from Dalton. I've heard that some researchers and advisors will being multidisciplinary as being unfocused and a bad thing. Do you think this mindset is prevalent in academia? This is also the same question in my mind.
Yeah, I think being unfocused and scattered is a bad thing, but I don't think being multidisciplinary and having multiple, streams means being unfocused or undisciplined. Or scattered. So I think that, yes, I agree with the conclusion, but not with the premise. And so I would say this, you will eventually have to show how everything connects. When we talked about the multiple brush strokes, you will eventually have to say, this is what this painting is and why it's a coherent whole. If you can't, then you are, in fact, trying to do multiple things at once. But if you are trying to solve a problem like opioid addictions or preventing falls in hospitals or I don't know, preventing planes from crashing. These are big, big problems. And if you don't have, a team and some knowledge of each of the disciplines that go into solving those problems, then I don't think you can do well. So as long as you can frame everything you're doing as connected and part of a bigger whole, I think you're okay. Now, somebody might still question that, and to that I will say there is a movement and has been a movement for several decades towards this concept of team science and interdisciplinarity. And so there are, for example, funding opportunities that say you must have an interdisciplinary team, you must have a transdisciplinary team. So I think there's some adoption of this concept of it takes multiple disciplines to get things done. But you yourself can't be an expert in each discipline. That I can tell you for sure. And if you are trying to be an expert in each discipline, all slowly at the same time, then you are unfocused and you are at risk.
Well, any other questions from our audience for Dr. Holden?
Rich, this is Jason. Really enjoyed your talk and learned some things about you that I didn't know before. Really fascinating. In hindsight, would you do anything different? For example, deciding to leave engineering, not start your engineering degree, do a psychology degree instead, then come back to engineering. In retrospect, would you handle that differently, knowing that you went on for a PhD? Because in grad school, especially if you're concentrating in human factors, you could take a lot of psychology electives and that sort of thing. And just curious if you feel like you would have done anything differently.
No, because I think I did it well. The undergrad part I think went really well because what I was able to do is with all the freedom of a liberal arts bachelor's of science degree, I took a lot of human factors courses. In fact, I started grad school having completed half the courses in human factors that I would have needed to do in my PhD, and I knew way more about human factors than anybody else at my level. And the reason is that as a psychology undergrad or as any other kind of liberal arts, you have a lot of electives, a lot of ways you can go and take courses outside of your major. And that's what I did. I took them all for the most part in human factors. I also took Scandinavian literature. I took, a music history class. I took Spanish. So I was able to do all sorts of stuff. But so I don't regret that. I think going the other way, I would have regretted it, where I would have not been able to really understand the basics of psychology. But the one thing that I had that my fellow industrial engineering graduates didn't have at the time that I started grad school was an appreciation for the scientific method and scientific experiments and writing, right? So as an undergrad psychology major, I had to do a lot of writing and I had to do a lot of, research methods. And that's not something that you have time for, I think, in industrial engineering or get to or is valued as much. So I would have really missed out on that going the other way. The one thing I regret, Jason, is doing a joint PhD. And it's not because the two things don't combine well theoretically or that I didn't benefit from doing both at the same time. But I really, really, really hated having two masters, being the servant of two masters. So I had to do a qualifying exam in one. I had to do 3 total qualifying exams for whatever reason. I had to defend things here and defend things there. I had to take all the courses here. I had to take all the courses there. I had to have friends here. I had to have friends there. And so having 2 worlds was not fun.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And any other questions? If no, oh, sorry, Josh, you have.
I mean, it's 3 o'clock. It's not vital if I do.
No, let's host the last question.
Okay. I was just going to ask, so industrial engineering has this core of like process improvement, in any scenario. And so as a department chair, I'm thinking undergrad specifically. I am a PhD student, but I reflect on my undergrad experience often. From the human-centric model perspective that you're describing, do you feel that either at your university or just generally speaking that our education systems for undergrads are appropriately human factors oriented? I know your area is healthcare, but as a department chair, I assume you see that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, first of all, how many people even know what human factors is? So like to try to convince any undergraduate program to adopt something they don't know about would be very challenging. And so because you have to show the value of adding it in, and undergraduate curricula are already packed of with stuff. So I think that some of the general skills, competencies should be included and can be included, and that's things like appraising a problem, understanding a problem, right? There are certainly human factors skills around evaluation, evaluating something for the effect on humans, as opposed to evaluating just something based on its technical merit or on its design, kind of separate from its effect on people who use it or who benefit from it. So there's a number of things that I think could be taught and should be taught, and I think human-centeredness and interactions with, between humans and non-human objects should be taught at all levels, and certainly undergraduate for all majors. But kind of requiring human factors courses, first we have to show that human factors is a relevant thing.
Sure, not necessarily so much like requiring or teaching human factors at every level, but I mean implementation. Do you see your department using, the faculty using the human factors, skills and things? I mean, in the everyday work of education.
Yeah, actually, that's well, that's okay. I don't know I'm going to answer both questions that I'm hearing in my head. One is, do they teach some of the principles or use some of the principles in the classroom that are inherent to human factors, for example? And I think yes, but they don't call it that. So like systems thinking, right? So my colleagues in public health teach the socio-ecological model, right? Which is like a set of intertwined factors from individual to community, neighborhood, environment, right? That's a systems model, and it, is adopted by National Cancer Institute. It's adopted by a lot of researchers in public health, and they teach that, and that is a systems model. And I teach a different systems model to my students in industrial engineering, right? But like they just don't call it that.
Okay.
But at the same time, do they practice like human factors methods in the continuous improvement of their pedagogy or in the classroom or in how they do things? No, and I think that is something that does take practical experience and intention to try to, for example, use agile mindset to improve any process. It doesn't just come because it's counterintuitive. And so, yeah, I wish that everybody would human factorize their classroom by, for example, paying attention to the needs, limitations, and abilities of the user, which is the student.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Dr. Holden. If you have any other questions, please leave your question to Dr. Holden himself and send him an email or send me an email. I will forward your questions to Dr. Holden. And this is a fantastic seminar, and thank you, Dr. Holden, again for providing the seminar, and let's call it a day. Thank you. And after the seminar, I will share the video with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.